Hello, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm thrilled you're here because today we are doing something a little bit different. We are wading into waters that, well, most of us spend our entire lives trying to avoid, but, and here's the kicker, it is the one swim we are all guaranteed to take. We are talking about end-of-life arrangements. And for those of you tuning in specifically for this topic, I want to say a special welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast listeners who are joining us for this deep dive.
It is a pleasure to be here. And honestly, it is fascinating that we have a crossover audience today because it really highlights how this conversation is, moving from the fringes into the mainstream.
It really is. And I think we need to start by acknowledging the elephant in the room. Death is uncomfortable. Planning for it is even more uncomfortable. We treat it like doing our taxes, but with much higher emotional stakes.
That's a good way to put it.
But specifically, we are looking at a tension that I think a lot of us feel but haven't quite articulated. On one side, we have this modern, hyper-aware society. We are obsessed with sustainability. We recycle our plastics. We worry about our carbon footprint. We buy organic. We try to live lightly.
Precisely. We optimize our lives for minimal environmental impact. We carry reusable water bottles. We compost our kitchen scraps.
Exactly. We do all of this work. But then on the other side, the traditional way we handle death, the standard American funeral, is basically an industrial heavy machinery operation.
Oh, it is.
It's heavy, it's toxic, and it is permanent.
It is a collision of values, isn't it? You spend 50, 60, 80 years trying to be a steward of the earth, and then your final act is to effectively preserve yourself in a way that prevents you from ever rejoining it. It's a paradox.
It is a huge paradox. And to help us navigate this, we are unpacking a really heavy-hitting source today, Final Rites, The Wisdom of Green Burial and Regeneration. This isn't just a brochure. It's a deep philosophical and technical look at how the funeral industry is shifting.
Right. It's not just about plant a tree over me. It's much deeper than that.
It is. And the mission for this deep dive is clear. We want to understand the move from a model of preservation and containment to a model of regeneration and renewal.
And we should probably clarify what we mean by those terms, because containment sounds like something from a zombie movie.
It really does, like something you'd see in a sci-fi film.
But in the industry, that is the operational logic. The old way is about sealing, protecting, and sanitizing. The new way, which, as Final Rites points out, is actually the ancient way, is about integration. It's about biology taking over where biography ends.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it. Biology taking over where biography ends.
So let's set the scene. When we say the old way or traditional burial, I think we all have a snapshot in our heads. The pristine lawn, the granite headstones, the shiny hearse.
It's a very manicured, very orderly picture.
Exactly. But Final Rites forces us to look at the inventory list behind that snapshot. And it is shocking. It is an industrial inventory. I mean, if you look at the aggregate data, and the source pulls no punches here, the amount of material we bury annually in the United States is staggering.
Staggering is the right word. Lay some of the numbers on us.
Okay, so every year, just in the U.S., we are burying enough steel in caskets to build the Golden Gate Bridge.
Wait, say that again?
Enough steel to build an entire Golden Gate Bridge every single year.
That's just, I can't even picture that. All that metal just sitting underground.
And that's just the steel. We are burying enough reinforced concrete in vaults to pave a 2-lane highway from New York to Detroit.
You're kidding. A highway?
A highway of concrete buried 6 feet underground where it will never be used, never be seen. It just sits there.
And it disrupts everything, I imagine. The soil, the water table.
Everything. And then there's the chemical aspect. This is the really insidious part. We bury hundreds of thousands of gallons of embalming fluid.
Which contains what exactly?
Formaldehyde, mainly. But also methanol, ethanol, and other solvents as a cocktail of, well, toxins.
And that is the part that really stopped me in my tracks, the embalming. I think there is this massive misconception, I certainly had it, that embalming is required, that it's a law.
Oh, absolutely.
That for public health, you have to be embalmed.
That is perhaps the most successful marketing campaign of the 20th century. Final Rites does a great job of debunking this. In the vast majority of cases, embalming is not required by law.
So it's a choice.
It is almost always a choice, and it's a choice presented by the funeral home. It's not a legal mandate.
So why do we do it? If it's not legally required, where did this tradition come from?
Well, the source takes us back to the Civil War. That's really where modern American embalming started.
The Civil War? That's earlier than I would have thought.
It is. You had soldiers dying on battlefields far from home, often in the heat of the South, and families wanted the bodies returned north for burial.
Of course.
But you couldn't just put a body on a slow-moving train in the middle of July without some form of preservation. It was a public health issue then, and, a practical one.
So what did they use? It wasn't formaldehyde back then, was it?
No, the early embalming fluids were even harsher. They were using arsenic and mercury-based solutions to arrest decomposition long enough for transport.
Arsenic and mercury. So literally poison.
Literally. So it was a logistical solution to a very specific problem of distance and time.
Okay, that makes sense. But the war ended. Why did the practice continue?
Exactly. Because after the war, the funeral industry, which was just starting to professionalize and form, realized that if you preserve the body, you can have a viewing. You can extend the timeline of the funeral. You can sell a more elaborate service. You can sell a more expensive casket. It moved from transport logistics to something they called the memory picture.
The memory picture. That sounds like marketing speak.
It absolutely is. The idea is that the family needs to see the loved one looking restful or asleep in order to get closure.
And to achieve that, look, you need to stop decomposition. You need formaldehyde.
You do. But let's look at the chemistry, as the source does. Formaldehyde is a known carcinogen. The people who work with it, embalmers, have higher rates of certain cancers.
I've heard that.
It's a harsh chemical fixative. It cross-links the proteins in your cells, which makes the tissue firm and rubbery, and that's what halts all the bacterial action.
So you were basically pickling the tissue.
That's a crude way to put it, but
Yeah.
it's not inaccurate. You are creating a sterile, toxic environment within the body.
And when you bury that, you are just introducing this huge volume of toxins directly into the soil.
Directly into the ground. We treat dead bodies as if they are toxic waste that needs to be neutralized and contained, when in reality a body that has died of natural causes is not a public health hazard. It's just organic matter.
It's just carbon and nitrogen and calcium waiting to be recycled.
That's all it is. And this leads us to the hardware. Because if you embalm the body, you then put it in a casket. And we're not talking about a simple pine box. We're talking about sealed caskets.
The sealer casket. I've seen that in the brochures. It sounds
Yeah.
so protective.
It does. And that's another fascinating piece of the preservation myth. These caskets have a thick rubber gasket, like on a refrigerator door. You turn a crank key, and it seals the lid airtight.
And the marketing pitch is what? That you're protecting the body from the elements.
The implication is that you're keeping the water and the worms and the dirt out. You're creating this pristine little bubble for your loved one.
Which feels dignified, right? We don't want mom getting wet.
Psychologically, yes. It appeals to our desire to protect. But biologically, Final Rites explains that this is disastrous.
How so?
By sealing the casket, you cut off oxygen. Decomposition is meant to be an aerobic process. It needs air for the right kind of bacteria to thrive.
Okay.
When you remove the air, you switch to anaerobic decomposition.
Yeah.
And that is rot. It's putrefaction. You end up creating this soupy liquid environment inside the casket rather than allowing the body to return to dust.
That is a very vivid and unpleasant image.
It's grim.
And we are paying thousands of dollars extra for this privilege.
We are paying a premium to arrest the natural cycle and, ironically, replace it with something much, much grimmer.
And then, as if the sealed metal box wasn't enough containment, we put the box inside another box. The vault.
The burial vault. This was the biggest surprise for me when I first looked into this data years ago. Most people have no idea this even exists.
I certainly didn't. I assumed you'd dig a hole, put the casket in, and fill it with dirt.
That's the logical assumption. But in almost every conventional cemetery in America, that's not what happens. You dig a hole, you use a crane to drop in a huge concrete or steel liner, you put the casket in that, and then you put a heavy concrete lid on it.
So it's a box in a box. And the source explains the reason for this, and it's surprisingly mundane. It's not for the body at all.
Yeah.
It's for the lawnmower.
It's strictly for landscaping.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with respecting the dead.
Explain that. How does a concrete box help with mowing the lawn?
Well, if you just bury a casket and put dirt on it, over time, the casket will break down and collapse under the weight of the earth.
Right, that makes sense.
And when it does, the ground above it settles. The grave sinks in. That makes the ground uneven. It's hard to drive the big riding mowers over it. And from the cemetery's perspective, it looks messy.
So the vault is just a retaining wall. It's there to keep the grass flat.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's there to support the weight of the dirt and the lawnmower so the grass above stays perfectly level and pristine.
So we are building underground concrete bunkers to protect the landscaping budget.
That is the economic reality. But the ecological reality, which is our focus today, is that we are creating an impermeable barrier. We are saying to nature, you cannot have this back.
You are locking it away.
You are creating what the source calls landfills of the dead. We are partitioning the earth into these little concrete cells where nothing can grow, nothing can cycle, nothing can get in or out.
It really frames the concept of containment perfectly. We are containing the nutrients, locking them away from the ecosystem forever. Now, I know what a lot of listeners are thinking, especially the environmentally conscious ones. They're thinking, okay, that's horrific. That is exactly why I'm choosing cremation. Cremation is the green option.
And that is the common assumption. It feels cleaner, there's no body, no decay. Fire is seen as a purifying element.
It seems like you're reducing your impact to just a handful of ashes.
Right, it feels like you disappear.
Right.
But Final Rites has a whole section on what it calls the cremation complexity. And it turns out burning a human body isn't exactly carbon neutral.
I had a feeling this was coming.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
Let's break down the physics of cremation. You are taking a human body, which is roughly 60 to 70% water, and you are trying to reduce it to bone fragments, what we call ash or cremains.
So you have to boil off all that water first.
You have to vaporize all of that water, and then you have to combust all the organic tissue.
And that takes a lot of heat.
A massive amount of heat. A retort, that's the technical name for the furnace, runs at between 1600 and 1800 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's hotter than a volcano.
It is incredibly hot, and it has to run at that temperature for 90 minutes to 2 hours, sometimes even longer for larger individuals.
Where does that energy come from?
Almost exclusively from natural gas. It's a fossil fuel-intensive process.
So every time you choose cremation, you are essentially burning a huge tank of fossil fuel.
The source equates the carbon footprint of a single cremation to driving an average car about 500 miles.
500 miles.
Yep. So imagine getting in your car and driving from San Francisco all the way down to San Diego. That's the carbon cost of your exit.
Wow. Okay, that's significant, especially if you multiply it by the millions of people who are cremated every year.
Exactly. It adds up to a massive carbon footprint for the entire industry. And it's not just carbon dioxide. We have to talk about other emissions.
That's jazz.
Well, think about dental work. If you have silver amalgam fillings in your teeth, those contain mercury.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that.
When they are incinerated at that temperature, the mercury vaporizes. It goes up the smokestack and into the atmosphere. Now, to be fair, many modern crematories have filtration systems or scrubbers to capture some of this, but it is still a recognized source of atmospheric heavy metal pollution.
So we're left with this synthesis point that the source drives home. In the traditional burial model, we are hoarding nutrients in a concrete box, taking up land and resources.
Right. It's a model of sequestration.
And in the cremation model, we are vaporizing those nutrients and using a significant amount of fossil fuels to do it.
Both methods are, in a sense, anti-nature. They fight against the natural cycle of decomposition and return.
They are both extractive. One extracts space and materials from the earth. The other extracts energy. Neither of them really gives back.
Exactly. And that is the pivot point. That is where we can move from the problem to the solution. That's where we get into section 2, the philosophy of regeneration.
This is where Final Rites stops just, listing the bad news and starts offering a different way of seeing the world. It talks about reframing death.
And it's a profound reframe. It's a shift from viewing death as a problem to be solved or a failure to be hidden to viewing death as a biological function to be honored.
The source uses this phrase that I just love, from extraction to regeneration.
That's the core thesis right there. Think about how we live our lives. We take from the earth constantly. We eat food that was grown in soil. We drink water. We breathe air. Our bodies are literally made of borrowed elements from the planet.
We're just temporary arrangements of carbon and water.
Exactly. The philosophy of regeneration simply says it is time to pay back the loan.
So instead of trying to preserve the body, which implies the body is still us and needs to be kept safe, we accept that the body is just energy. It's nutrients that need to be released back into the system.
Precisely. It's working with decomposition instead of against it. The source describes decomposition not as some tragic decay, but as a miraculous engine of life. It's the forest floor principle.
Okay, let's expand on that analogy because I think it's the most powerful image in the book. The difference between a concrete vault and a forest floor.
In a vault, as we discussed, nothing happens. It is static. It is sterile. It's an information and energy sink, a dead zone.
Right.
Now, picture a forest floor. A great oak tree falls in a storm. A deer dies of old age. What happens to it?
Well, it gets broken down.
Immediately.
Yeah.
It is immediately colonized by a whole universe of organisms. Bacteria, fungi, insects, worms, a whole soil food web. They break down the complex organic structures, the wood, the flesh, the bones, and they release the base components: nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, carbon.
And that becomes food for new life.
It creates a nutrient flush that feeds the moss, the ferns, the saplings that are struggling for light. That dead deer or fallen tree becomes the foundation for a riot of new life.
So Final Rites is asking us to choose. Do we want our final resting place to be the static box, or do we want it to be the forest floor?
And when you frame it that way, the value proposition, another term the source uses, becomes crystal clear. The value isn't in how well you are preserved for posterity. The value is in how much life you can generate after you're gone.
It's a complete 180 on what we consider success in a funeral. Success isn't mom looks like she's sleeping in the casket.
No.
Success is mom is feeding an oak tree that will stand for 200 years.
It is a legacy of biology, not just memory. And this brings us to the actual mechanics.
Yeah.
Because philosophy is great, but, how do you actually do this? What does it look like on the ground? Let's go to section 3. The mechanics of green burial.
So if I decide this is for me and I go to a green burial cemetery, what am I seeing? Because my mental image is still kind of vague. Is it just a body in a hole in the woods?
Well, yes and no.
Yeah.
It is that simple in principle, but it's also highly regulated and thoughtfully designed. The aesthetic is completely different. The source describes these natural burial plots as being part of conservation land. So you are not seeing manicured Kentucky bluegrass that requires constant irrigation, herbicides, and pesticides.
No perfect green lawn.
No.
Yeah.
You are seeing a native meadow with wildflowers. You are seeing a protected woodland. You're seeing a coastal scrub habitat. It's preserved as it should be.
So the cemetery looks more like a nature preserve.
It is a nature preserve. That's the beauty of the model. The burial fees often go into a trust that is used to restore the land, to remove invasive species, and to place a conservation easement on the property so it can never be developed.
So your burial is actively funding conservation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the infrastructure. We talked about the vault being the villain. I assume there are no vaults here.
I'm assuming no vaults, no liners.
No vaults, no liners, no exceptions. The body goes directly into the earth. And this is where a really interesting technical detail comes in. The depth of the grave becomes crucial. We all know the phrase, 6 feet under.
Right. That's the standard. That's what you hear everywhere.
In green burials, 6 feet is actually too deep.
Really? Why? I would think deeper is better, more secure.
It seems that way, but if you go down 6 feet, you're often below the most active biological layer of the soil. There isn't enough oxygen down there. The microbial life is sparse.
Oh, so you get that anaerobic problem again.
You risk that anaerobic preservation we talked about earlier. Final Rites explains that for true, efficient regeneration, to let the soil food web really do its work, you want to bury at a shallower depth, about 3.5 to 4 feet.
That seems shallow. I mean, my immediate thought, and I bet the listener's thought, is animals. Want a coyote or something dig that up?
It is the #1 question people ask. And the source addresses it with hard data and experience from cemeteries that have been doing this for decades. The smell barrier for most scavenging animals is about 18 inches of soil.
Okay.
If you are burying at 3.5 or 4 feet, and you have that compacted earth on top, plus the amount of soil that is usually left to settle over time, you're well below the risk zone. Animals simply aren't interested. They're not going to expend that much energy.
But at that depth, you're still accessible to everything else.
You are. The plant roots can reach it. The worms and the microbes can reach it. You're placing the body right in the nutrient zone.
You are optimizing for uptake by the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And what is the body in? We aren't using the sealed metal casket, obviously.
No. The rule is simple. Everything that goes into the ground must be biodegradable. So you might use a simple shroud.
Just a cloth wrapping.
Yep, a cloth wrapping made of linen, cotton, or wool. Or you might use a casket, but it'll be made of woven willow or bamboo, or even just unfinished soft pine with no metal nails or toxic glues.
I've seen pictures of the wicker ones. They look like large baskets. It actually looks much softer, much more gentle than a shiny, hard-edged metal box.
It feels more organic, doesn't it? It feels like something that belongs in the ground, that is designed to return to it.
It does. Now let's talk about marking the grave, because this is a big mental hurdle for a lot of people. We are so used to the headstone. Here lies John Smith. If it's just a meadow, how do I find John Smith?
That is a very real cultural shift we have to make. In a true conservation burial ground, you generally cannot have a polished granite slab standing upright. It ruins the natural viewshed, it interrupts the ecosystem.
It looks artificial.
It is. So Final Rites outlines the alternatives. Often they use natural field stones, rocks, that are indigenous to that specific piece of land. They might engrave the name and dates on it, but it lies flat with the ground. It just looks like another rock in a field.
Or they use plants.
Yes, the living marker. This is a beautiful concept. You might be buried near a specific already existing tree, or they might plant a native shrub or tree over the grave. The plant itself is the monument.
I love that idea. But
Yeah.
for the people who really need precision, the people who need to know this is the exact spot, technology is playing a role here too, right?
It is. The source mentions GPS coordinates. The entire cemetery is digitally mapped with incredible precision. You have an app on your phone, you walk out into this beautiful field of wildflowers, you follow the little blue dot, and it says, "You are here." You look down, and it's just grass and flowers. But,
That merges the modern with the ancient in a really cool way. You get the data and the precision, but the land gets to remain wild and unspoiled.
visualizing the result is so important. When you go to visit, you are visiting a living system. You might see a hawk hunting overhead. You might see bees on the flowers. You are visiting life, not a static city of stone.
Now, we have to circle back to cremation. Because even with the carbon costs we discussed, millions of people still choose it. It's practical, it's often more affordable, it's portable. If I die in New York, but my family wants me to be buried in California, cremation is the easiest way to get there.
Absolutely. And Final Rites acknowledges that. It's not about being dogmatic and saying, don't cremate.
Yeah.
It's about saying, if you do cremate, how can we green up the next step of the process?
And this brings us to Section 4, the innovation of biodegradable urns.
This is a really exciting area. It's a material science revolution, really. The goal here is to mitigate that final impact. Once you have the ash, the cremated remains, you still have a choice. Do you put it in a bronze jar on the mantelpiece forever? Do you put it in a concrete niche in a columbarium wall? Or do you find a way to return it to the earth?
But there's a catch with ash, right? The source points this out. You can't just dump it on a plant and expect it to be good fertilizer.
This is a crucial detail that most people miss, and it's so important. Human ash has a very high pH. It is extremely alkaline, almost like bleach.
So it's salty and basic.
Very. If you pour a concentration of ash directly onto the roots of a beloved rose bush, you will chemically burn it. You will almost certainly kill the plant you are trying to honor.
I had no idea. You see that in movies all the time, people scattering ashes in a garden.
It's a very bad idea unless you spread it so thin that it's just a light dusting over a large area. But the real innovation is in urns that are designed to buffer that pH. Final Rites talks about things like the living urn or biocern. These are containers made of biodegradable materials like recycled paper pulp that have two compartments.
Okay, what's in them?
One compartment is for the ash. The other compartment above it contains a special soil mixture and a seed for a tree of your choice.
And the soil mixture neutralizes the ash.
Yes. It contains additives that lower the pH and create a buffer. It allows the urn to break down slowly so the new tree roots can actually access the beneficial minerals in the ash, like calcium and phosphorus, without getting chemically burned. It turns a potential toxin into actual fertilizer.
That is brilliant. So you are literally planting a tree with the remains, not just on top of them.
You are. You are creating a new life directly from them. And then there are the water urns.
Oh, right, for burial at sea.
Exactly. We've all seen the scene, like in The Big Lebowski, where they try to scatter ashes from a cliff and the wind just blows it right back in their face.
It's the classic funeral fail, a moment of comedy in the middle of grief.
It's undignified and honestly pretty traumatic for the family. A biodegradable water urn solves this problem beautifully. It's made of materials like recycled paper or compacted salt or even sand and gelatin. You place the entire sealed urn in the water.
And it floats for a bit.
It floats for a few minutes. It drifts away from the boat. It gives you that quiet moment of ceremony and goodbye. And then, as it saturates with water, it slowly and gracefully sinks beneath the surface.
And then it dissolves.
Once it is underwater, it dissolves completely over a few hours. No plastic bag, no metal container. The ashes are released into the current gently and cleanly.
It creates a moment rather than a mess.
Exactly. And it aligns perfectly with that symbolism we talked about. It's transformation rather than finality. A jar on a shelf is static. It's a period at the end of a sentence. A tree that grows or an urn that dissolves into the ocean is a segue. It's a comma. It says, the story continues, just in a different form.
That leads us right into the heart of why we do funerals at all. It's for the living. It's for the feelings, which is section 5, the emotional and cultural impact.
There is a fear, I think, that green burial means cheap burial or
Yeah.
less dignified burial.
The thought of, we didn't love Dad enough to buy him the expensive bronze casket.
That is the consumer conditioning of the last century speaking. We have been taught to equate expenditure with love. But final rites challenges us to look at connection instead.
The source suggests that these natural settings actually encourage a deeper, quieter form of grief.
Think about the biophilia hypothesis, the idea that humans have an innate biological need to connect with nature. When we are grieving, when we feel lost, where do we go to find peace? Do we go to a strip mall? Do we go to a concrete parking lot? No. We go to the ocean. We go to the woods. We look at the stars.
We look for something bigger than us, for perspective.
We look for cycles. We look for evidence that life goes on even after a profound loss. A green burial ground provides that evidence naturally. You stand there, you hear the wind in the trees, you see the seasons changing, it grounds you. It tells you that death is part of the deal, not a terrible mistake.
And there is this concept in the source of healing through purpose.
This is so powerful. If you are a family member and you know that your loved one's burial helped save a 50-acre piece of forest from being turned into a subdivision, that gives you a new narrative. It transforms the pain of the loss into a positive contribution.
So it's not just Dad is gone, it's Dad is protecting this valley.
Exactly. It gives the death an ongoing positive meaning. And you witness continuity. If you visit a grave in a standard cemetery year after year, you see a stone getting older. It gets stained, it cracks, it weathers. It is a monument to entropy and decay.
Right.
If you visit a green grave, you see a tree getting bigger. You see a shrub blooming in the spring. You see life winning.
That is a profound psychological difference. Watching something grow versus watching something crumble.
It helps move the grief along a healthier path.
And it's about alignment, too. The source talks about the kind of hypocrisy of the environmentalist conventional funeral.
It's about integrity, really. If someone spent their whole life birdwatching, hiking, composting, recycling, and worrying about climate change, putting them in a non-biodegradable steel box filled with toxic chemicals is a contradiction. It feels off-key. It's a dissonance.
It's like a final act of denial of who they actually were in life.
But when the funeral matches the life, when the values are aligned right to the very end, it feels right. It feels complete and true. And that brings a huge amount of comfort to the family. They know they did right by the person they lost.
So if someone is listening to this and they're nodding along thinking, yes, this is what I want, or this is what I want for my parents, how do we actually make it happen? Because the funeral industry is a big machine and it feels like it's hard to stop the gears once they start turning. Which brings us to section 6, practicalities, logistics, and planning.
The first thing to understand is that it's not an all or nothing decision. The source introduces a concept I love called the green spectrum.
A spectrum. Okay, that makes it less intimidating.
Exactly. You don't have to be wrapped in a simple sheet and buried in the wilderness if that feels too radical for your family. You can hybridize.
Give us an example of a hybrid approach. What would that look like?
Okay, so you could have a traditional church service. You can have the viewing for family who need that. But maybe you don't do embalming, or you use non-toxic essential oils for temporary preservation. And then you use a simple biodegradable casket. And you bury in a standard cemetery, but you ask them not to use a sealed vault. Maybe they have a grave liner with an open bottom that still satisfies their landscaping rules, but allows the body to connect with the earth.
So you can green up the edges even if you can't go full conservation burial.
Exactly. You make the greenest choices you can within the system you're in. But to do any of this, and final rites cannot stress this enough, you need education and communication.
The talk.
The talk. You have to have the conversation with your family before the death happens. It's not a conversation for the hospital bedside.
Because once the death happens, the clock starts ticking and people are in shock.
The clock starts, the shock sets in, and the grief is overwhelming. When a family walks into a funeral home in that state, they are not in a position to negotiate or research options. They will take the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is the traditional package.
The funeral director puts a menu in front of them and they pick package B because it seems like the right thing to do and they don't want to look cheap.
Correct. Unless you have written down, I want a green burial. I do not want a vault. Here's the cemetery I have chosen. Your wishes will likely get steamrolled by the system. The source mentions resources like the funeral program site that help families actually document these wishes. You need a script. You need a plan.
What about the legal barriers? Is this even legal everywhere?
This is another big misconception. Green burial is legal in all 50 states. There is no state law that says you must use a vault, or you must be embalmed, or you must use a metal casket. However, individual cemeteries have their own rules. They are private businesses.
So the law of the land says yes, but the cemetery owner's policy might say no.
That's it exactly. If the cemetery's policy requires a vault for their lawn maintenance, you have to follow their policy or go to a different cemetery. So the main barrier is usually availability, not legality. You have to find a Green Burial Council certified provider in your area.
So you have to do your homework and shop around beforehand.
You do. And for things like water burial, you absolutely need permits. You can't just go drop an urn in a public lake. There are EPA regulations about how many nautical miles offshore you need to be. You need to work with a knowledgeable funeral director who knows the green landscape.
Let's talk about the bottom line, the financial aspect. Because usually eco-friendly means more expensive. Organic food costs more, electric cars cost more. Is green burial just for the wealthy?
This is the delightful surprise. Green burial is almost always significantly cheaper.
Really? Why is that?
Well, just think about what you are removing from the invoice. The embalming fee, that's maybe $800 to $1,000, gone. The casket. A mid-range metal sealer casket is $3,000 to $10,000. A beautiful wicker or simple pine casket is maybe $1,000 to $2,000. The vault, that's another $1,500 to $2,000 easily gone.
So you are just stripping away all the expensive industrial and unnecessary hardware.
You are. You're paying for the plot of land and the service of opening and closing the grave. A green burial might cost, say, $3,000 to $5,000 in total, whereas a traditional funeral easily runs $10,000 to $15,000 or more.
That is a massive difference, especially for a family that might be struggling.
It is. But the source adds a really important nuance here. Don't choose it just because it's cheap.
Right, because then it can feel like a clearance sale or like you're cutting corners.
Exactly. If the primary motivation is only saving money, it can feel like you are compromising on respect. But if the motivation is saving the earth and honoring the person's values, and the money saving is a wonderful bonus, then it feels dignified and right. But practically speaking, reducing the financial burden on a grieving family is a huge act of compassion.
That is a great point. Saddling your family with debt is not a good way to start their grieving process.
It just adds a layer of stress to a time that is already unbearable. Removing that huge price tag helps clear the air for actual grieving.
So we have covered the toxic chemistry of the old way, the beautiful biology of the new way, the logistics, the money, and the feelings. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's try to synthesize this journey.
If we look at the arc of this whole conversation, we have really traveled from a place of heaviness to a place of lightness.
That's it. That's the perfect word. Traditional burial is heavy. Heavy materials, heavy chemicals, heavy emotional burden, heavy costs.
And a heavy separation from nature. Green burial is light. The materials are biodegradable. The process is integrated. The philosophy is cyclical.
Final rites leaves us with this core takeaway, which is that we don't have to choose between honoring our loved ones and honoring the planet. We can do both at the same time.
In fact, honoring the planet is the best way to honor a loved one who cared about it. It is a dual act of respect and stewardship.
And it circles back to that word you used at the end there, compassion.
Yes, compassion for the dead, by allowing them to complete their natural cycle and return to the elements. Compassion for the living, by giving them a beautiful, living place of peace to visit. And compassion for the future, for future generations, by not leaving them a legacy of underground concrete bunkers and polluted soil.
It is about being a good ancestor.
Being a good ancestor, I really like that. That's what it comes down to.
So, as we close out, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought from the source. Something to chew on. We have been talking about death as a generative act.
Right, creating life from the end of a life.
So if we start to view our own death as a final, powerful way to heal the earth, how might that change the way we view our place in the natural world while we are still alive?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? If you truly accept that you are going to be future soil, that you're going to be food for an oak tree, doesn't that change how you treat the soil and the trees today?
We are part of the cycle right now. We aren't separate observers just waiting to enter it.
We are participants,
Yeah.
always have been. And green burial is just the final, honest acknowledgement of that participation.
A huge thank you to the Funeral Channel Network listeners for joining us today, and to everyone who is rethinking their exit strategy. This is a conversation worth having.
Absolutely. Have the talk. Make a plan.
Stay curious. We'll see you in the next deep dive.